Blackwells Queen. Taken as a prisoner of war, Lady Juliana of Thornwick expected to be thrown in the dungeons of Sir Rhys Montrose, the warrior who had conquered her father's lands. Instead, he stood before her, arms crossed. "I have no use for a caged bird," he murmured. "So tell me, my lady, will you fly or will you fight?" Chapter 1. The Lion's Decree. The heavy oak door creaked shut, the sound echoing through the stone chamber like a final judgment. Lady Juliana of Thornwick stood before Sir Rhys Montrose, not in the dank, rat-infested dungeon she had envisioned, but in a surprisingly well-appointed solar. Sunlight streamed through a narrow, arched window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and highlighting the stark contrast between her captive state and the room's unexpected comfort. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes adorned the walls, their vibrant colors a mockery of her current predicament. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, warding off the autumn chill that had seeped into her very bones during the long, arduous journey from Thornwick. Rhys Montrose. The Lion of Lyonesse, they called him. The man who had, with ruthless efficiency, dismantled her father's defenses and claimed Thornwick as his own. He was even more imposing in person than the rumors had painted him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a frame honed by years of battle, he stood before her, not in shining armor, but in a simple, dark tunic that emphasized the raw power he exuded. His arms were crossed, a gesture that spoke of both confidence and a certain guardedness. His hair, the color of dark honey touched by the sun, was pulled back from a face that was both strikingly handsome and undeniably hard. Eyes, the deep green of a shadowed forest, studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Juliana lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze. She would not cower. She was a daughter of Thornwick, and even in defeat, she would hold onto her pride. Her travel-stained gown, once of fine velvet, now felt like a shroud, a symbol of her lost home and freedom. The chill of the stone floor seeped through the thin soles of her slippers, a constant reminder of her vulnerability. "I expected the dungeons," Juliana finally said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her heart. She had schooled herself to show no fear, to mask the turmoil that raged within. Rhys Montrose tilted his head slightly, a flicker of something that might have been amusement or perhaps pity crossing his features. "And be deprived of the pleasure of your company, my lady? I think not." The pleasure of her company? Was he mocking her? Juliana's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She had heard the tales of his conquests, both on the battlefield and, if the whispers were to be believed, in the bedchamber. Was she to be another trophy, another conquest to add to his already formidable list? "I am your prisoner," she stated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Treat me as such." He took a step closer, the movement fluid and graceful, like a predator approaching its prey. The scent of leather and wood smoke clung to him, a strangely comforting aroma in this terrifying situation. Prisoner? Captive? These are mere words, Lady Juliana. Words that hold little meaning in the grand scheme of things. He uncrossed his arms, and for a fleeting moment, Juliana thought he might reach for her. She instinctively recoiled, a flicker of fear finally breaking through her carefully constructed facade. But he simply gestured towards a high-backed chair positioned near the fire. "Sit," he commanded, his voice softer now, yet still holding an undeniable authority. "We have much to discuss." Juliana hesitated. To obey would be to acknowledge his power over her, to submit to his will. Yet, to refuse would be a futile act of defiance, one that would likely gain her nothing but a swift and unpleasant return to the cold reality of her captivity. She chose the path of least resistance for now. She moved towards the chair, her movements stiff and deliberate, acutely aware of his gaze following her every step. As she sat, she carefully arranged the folds of her gown, a small act of reclaiming some semblance of control. The warmth of the fire was welcome, a stark contrast to the icy fear that had taken root deep within her. Rhys Montrose watched her, his expression unreadable. He then moved to a small table where a silver flagon and 2 goblets sat. He poured a dark, rich wine into one of the goblets and offered it to her.
Wine?
He asked. It will help ease the chill. Juliana eyed the goblet suspiciously. Was it poisoned? Drugged? She wouldn't put it past him. Yet, to refuse would be another act of defiance, and she needed to conserve her strength, to choose her battles wisely. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She took the goblet, her fingers brushing against his. The contact was brief, yet it sent a jolt of unexpected warmth through her. She quickly looked away, focusing on the swirling liquid in the goblet. She took a small sip, the wine surprisingly smooth and flavorful. It did little to ease the knot of tension in her stomach, but it was a welcome distraction. Rhys Montrose poured himself a goblet and then sat in a chair opposite her, the firelight casting dancing shadows on his face. He studied her for a long moment, his green eyes seeming to pierce through her defenses, seeing straight into her soul. I have no use for a caged bird, he finally said, his voice low and resonant. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. So tell me, my lady, will you fly or will you fight? The question caught her off guard. Fly? Fight? What did he mean? Was he offering her freedom? Or was this some cruel game? A test of her loyalty, her spirit? She searched his face for any hint of deception, any sign of mockery, but found only that same, unreadable intensity. Her mind raced. Fly returned to Thornwick, a place now under his control, a place where she would be a constant reminder of his victory, a potential symbol of resistance? Or fight remain here, in his presence, a pawn in his game, whatever that game might be. The choice was a cruel one, a dilemma wrapped in the guise of freedom. Both paths were fraught with danger, with uncertainty. Yet, within the depths of her despair, a spark of defiance flickered. She was not a caged bird. She was a woman of Thornwick, and she would not be broken. She met his gaze, her own eyes hardening with resolve. The choice, she realized, was not about escape or resistance, but about something far more profound. It was about who she was, who she would become in the face of this adversity. I am not a bird, Sir Rhys, she said, her voice gaining strength. I am a woman of Thornwick, and I will choose my own path. The fire crackled, its flames leaping suddenly, then fading. A log broke and fell, sending sparks up and outward, mirroring something of the shift and challenge in his gaze. Chapter 2. Whispers of Thornwick. The silence that followed Juliana's declaration stretched, taut and heavy, filled with unspoken challenges. Rhys Montrose leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his green eyes never leaving hers. He seemed to be weighing her words, assessing her spirit, searching for any hint of weakness or deceit. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the sharp planes of his face, the slight furrow of his brow, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. He was a man accustomed to command, to obedience, yet there was a flicker of something else in his gaze, a hint of respect, perhaps, or even curiosity. Finally he spoke, his voice low and measured. Your own path. An intriguing choice, Lady Juliana. But what does that path entail? Juliana hesitated. She had spoken from instinct, from a deep-seated need to assert her agency in a situation where she had none. But now, faced with his direct question, she realized she had no clear plan, no concrete strategy. She only knew that she would not be a passive victim, a pawn in his game. It entails survival, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. It entails protecting what remains of my family, my people. Your people are now my people, Lady Juliana, Rhys reminded her, his voice devoid of any warmth. Thornwick is mine. Your father swore fealty to me before he paused, the unspoken word before he died, hanging heavy in the air. Juliana flinched at the reminder of her father's death. She had not been present at the final battle, having been sent away to a supposedly safe haven, a small, fortified convent nestled deep in the forest. She had only learned of his demise through a whispered message from a loyal servant who had managed to escape the carnage. The grief was still raw, a gaping wound in her heart. He swore fealty under duress, she countered, her voice trembling slightly. He had no choice. He chose to defy me, Rhys said, his voice hardening. He chose to break his oath, to align himself with my enemies. He paid the price for his treachery. Juliana bristled at the accusation. My father was a loyal man. He would never. Loyalty is a fickle thing, Lady Juliana, Rhys interrupted, his voice laced with a cynicism that chilled her to the bone. It shifts with the winds of fortune, with the tides of power. Your father made his choice, and he suffered the consequences. He stood up and began to pace the room, his movements restless and agitated. The firelight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making him seem even more imposing, more unpredictable. I offered him terms, he continued, his voice echoing in the chamber. Honorable terms. I would have allowed him to retain his title, his lands, under my rule. But he refused. He chose pride over pragmatism, ambition over the well-being of his people. Juliana stared at him, her mind reeling. Was this true? Had her father been offered a chance to save himself, to save Thornwick, and refused? She had always believed him to be a wise and just ruler, a man who put the needs of his people above all else. But now, doubt crept in, a poisonous seed planted by Rhys's words. I don't believe you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were hollow, lacking conviction. Rhys stopped pacing and turned to face her, his green eyes piercing through her. Believe what you will, Lady Juliana. It matters little now. Your father is dead. Thornwick is mine. And you are my guest. He emphasized the word guest, drawing out the syllables, making it clear that it was a euphemism, a polite fiction masking the reality of her captivity. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice laced with a mixture of fear and defiance. He smiled then, a slow, chilling smile that did not reach his eyes. That, my lady, is the question, isn't it? For now, I want you to adapt. To learn the ways of my household. To understand that your life is no longer your own. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her travel-stained gown, her disheveled hair, the defiant tilt of her chin. You will be given chambers suitable to your station, he continued. You will be provided with food, clothing, everything you need. You will be treated with respect, as befits a lady of your birth. But you will also be expected to obey, to follow the rules, to understand that your freedom is limited. He moved closer, his presence filling the room, overwhelming her senses. He reached out and gently touched a stray strand of her hair, tucking it behind her ear. The gesture was unexpected, intimate, and it sent a shiver of unease through her. Do not try to escape, Lady Juliana, he said, his voice low and menacing. It would be unwise. The walls of this castle are thick, the guards are loyal, and the surrounding forests are treacherous. You would not survive. He stepped back, his gaze holding hers captive. For now, consider yourself under my protection. But remember, protection comes at a price. And that price, my lady, is your obedience. He turned and walked towards the door, leaving her alone with her thoughts, her fears, and the chilling realization that her life was now inextricably intertwined with that of the Lion of Lyonesse, the man who had conquered her home and held her fate in his hands. The whispers of Thornwick, of her father's legacy and her people's suffering, seemed to echo in the silence, a constant reminder of the burden she now carried. Outside, a raven croaked, its voice lost in the rustle and whispers of night's arrival. Chapter 3. The Falcon and the Dove. The chambers assigned to Juliana were, as Rhys had promised, suitable for a lady of her station. A spacious room with a large, four-poster bed draped in heavy velvet curtains, a fireplace that crackled merrily, and a window that offered a breathtaking view of the castle courtyard and the rolling hills beyond. It was a far cry from the cold, damp cell she had initially feared, yet it felt no less like a prison. The walls, though adorned with tapestries depicting scenes of courtly life, seemed to close in on her, suffocating her with their silent grandeur. A young woman, barely more than a girl, entered the room, her steps hesitant, her eyes downcast. She carried a tray laden with food, roasted chicken, bread still warm from the oven, a bowl of fruit, and a small pitcher of wine. "My lady," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "Lord Montrose has sent this for you." Juliana regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The girl was small and slender, with a delicate face framed by a cascade of dark curls. Her eyes, when she finally dared to lift them, were a soft, dove gray, filled with a mixture of fear and, was it pity? "What is your name?" Juliana asked, her voice gentle, trying to put the girl at ease. "Alara, my lady," the girl replied, her voice still trembling slightly. "Alara," Juliana repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "Thank you for bringing this. I am grateful." Alara placed the tray on a small table near the window and then began to fuss with the fire, adding more logs, adjusting the damper. She seemed eager to avoid Juliana's gaze, to remain invisible. "Are you from Thornwick?" Juliana asked, a sudden pang of longing for her home, for familiar faces, filling her heart. Alara shook her head. "No, my lady. I am from Lyonesse, Lord Montrose's homeland." Juliana nodded, a sense of disappointment settling over her. She was surrounded by strangers, by the people of her conqueror. There was no one here she could trust, no one who shared her memories, her grief, her fears. "Have you been here long?" Juliana asked, trying to keep the conversation going, to break through the girl's reserve. "Since I was a child, my lady," Alara replied, her voice gaining a bit of strength. "My mother was a servant in the castle. She died a few years ago." Juliana felt a pang of sympathy for the girl. To lose one's mother at such a young age, to be left alone in a world as harsh and unforgiving as this. "I am sorry for your loss," Juliana said sincerely. Alara finally looked at her, her gray eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored Juliana's own. "Thank you, my lady." A comfortable quiet settled. "Lord Montrose, he is a good man," Alara said suddenly, her voice filled with a surprising conviction. "He is fair. He protects his people." Juliana regarded her skeptically. "He conquered my home," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "He killed my father." Alara flinched at her words, but she did not back down. "He offered your father terms, my lady. He did not want bloodshed. But your father, he refused." Juliana remembered Rhys's words, his claim that he had offered her father honorable terms. Was this the truth? Was Alara, this seemingly innocent girl, simply repeating the propaganda of her lord? Or was there more to the story than she knew? "He is a warrior," Alara continued, her voice gaining a bit of passion. "He is strong. He has to be. But he is also just." Juliana remained silent, her mind struggling to reconcile the image of the ruthless conqueror with the portrait of the just and fair lord that Alara was painting. She wanted to believe Alara, to find some solace in the idea that Rhys Montrose was not simply a monster. But the memories of her father's death, of the destruction of Thornwick, were still too raw, too painful. "He is kind to me," Alara added softly, her gaze dropping back to the floor. "He has always been kind to me." Juliana saw the flicker of something in Alara's eyes, a hint of affection? Admiration? Was it possible that this girl, this servant, had feelings for her lord? It was not uncommon for such attachments to develop, even in the face of power imbalances and social barriers. "You admire him," Juliana said, stating the observation rather than asking a question. Alara blushed, her cheeks turning a delicate shade of pink. "He is my lord," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Juliana nodded, understanding dawning in her heart. Alara was like a dove, gentle, innocent, easily swayed by the power and charisma of the falcon, the predator, Rhys Montrose. And Juliana, she was caught in the middle, torn between her own instincts, her own memories, and the conflicting narratives that surrounded her. "He asked me to attend to you," Alara said, changing the subject. "To make sure you have everything you need. To help you adjust." Juliana felt a surge of suspicion. Was this another ploy by Rhys, another attempt to control her, to manipulate her? Was Alara his spy, his informant? I am capable of taking care of myself, Juliana said, her voice hardening slightly. Alara looked at her, her gray eyes filled with a surprising understanding. I know, my lady, she said softly. But sometimes, even the strongest of us need help. Even the bravest of us need a friend. The word friend hung in the air, a fragile bridge between two women from different worlds, two women caught in the web of war and power. Juliana felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of warmth in the cold, dark prison of her heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, she was not entirely alone. Outside, the wind howled, picking up a mournful tune through the battlements, but inside, by the fire, a tentative peace began to form. Chapter 4. Beneath a Caged Moon. Sleep eluded Juliana. Despite the luxurious comfort of the bed, the softness of the feather mattress, and the warmth of the fire, her mind raced with 1,000 anxieties. Images of her father, pale and lifeless, flashed before her eyes. The sounds of battle, the screams of the dying, echoed in her ears. The weight of her captivity, the uncertainty of her future, pressed down on her like a physical burden. She tossed and turned, the silk sheets tangling around her legs, the velvet curtains seeming to suffocate her. Finally, she gave up on sleep and rose from the bed, padding barefoot across the cold stone floor to the window. The moon, a sliver of silver hanging high in the inky sky, cast a pale, ethereal glow over the castle courtyard. Below, she could see the guards patrolling the walls, their torches flickering like fireflies in the darkness. The wind had died down, and an eerie silence had settled over the castle, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant bark of a dog. Juliana wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that had settled deep within her bones. She felt utterly alone, isolated, a stranger in a strange land. Even Alara, with her tentative offer of friendship, felt distant, a world away. She gazed out at the moonlit landscape, her thoughts drifting back to Thornwick. She pictured her home, the familiar stone walls, the gardens where she had spent countless hours as a child, the great hall where her family had gathered for feasts and celebrations. All of it was gone now, lost to her forever. A tear traced a path down her cheek, followed by another, and another, until she was weeping silently, her body shaking with the force of her grief. She had held back her tears for so long, forcing herself to be strong, to show no weakness. But now, alone in the darkness, she allowed herself to mourn, to release the pent-up emotions that had been tearing her apart. As she wept, she became aware of a presence behind her. She turned, startled, to see Rhys Montrose standing in the doorway, his silhouette outlined against the faint light from the corridor. He was dressed in a simple, dark robe, his hair loose and unkempt, as if he, too, had been unable to sleep. He did not speak, simply stood there, watching her, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Juliana quickly wiped away her tears, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable state. She straightened her shoulders, trying to regain her composure, to mask her grief behind a facade of defiance. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice hoarse and unsteady. He took a step into the room, his movements slow and deliberate. "I heard you crying," he said, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. Juliana turned away, her gaze returning to the moonlit courtyard. "I am fine," she said, though the lie was evident even to her own ears. He moved closer, until he was standing just behind her, his presence filling the room, his warmth a stark contrast to the coldness of the night. She could feel the heat of his body, smell the faint scent of wood smoke and leather that clung to him. "You are not fine, Lady Juliana," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You are grieving. You have lost your home, your father, your freedom. It is natural to mourn." His words, spoken with such unexpected empathy, caught her off guard. She had expected him to be cold, aloof, indifferent to her suffering. But there was a genuine concern in his voice, a hint of understanding that surprised her. "Leave me alone," she said, her voice trembling. She did not want his pity, his sympathy. She did not want to feel anything for this man, her captor, her enemy. He did not leave. Instead, he reached out and gently touched her shoulder. The contact was brief, yet it sent a jolt of unexpected warmth through her, a warmth that both comforted and terrified her. "I know what it is like to lose someone you love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have seen too much death, too much suffering. It changes you." Juliana turned to face him, her eyes searching his. She saw a flicker of pain in his green eyes, a shadow of a past sorrow that mirrored her own. For a fleeting moment, she saw not the ruthless conqueror, but a man who had known loss, who had felt the sting of grief. Who did you lose?" she asked, the question escaping her lips before she could stop it. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "My wife," he said, his voice barely audible. "She died many years ago, in childbirth." Juliana felt a pang of sympathy for him, a surprising and unwelcome emotion. She had not considered that he might have known such personal tragedy, that he might have loved and lost, just as she had. I am sorry," she said sincerely. He looked up at her, his green eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to stretch back through the years. "It was a long time ago," he said, "but the pain, it never truly goes away." They stood there in silence, two souls connected by a shared experience of loss, a shared understanding of the fragility of life. The moon, a silent witness to their sorrow, cast its pale light upon them, bathing them in an ethereal glow. It was as though the night itself, the moon particularly, was holding them captive in its cage of night. Why did you bring me here?" Juliana asked, breaking the silence. "Why not simply kill me, as you killed my father?" He sighed, his gaze returning to the window. "Because you are not your father," he said. "You are different. And because I believe there is still hope for peace. For understanding." He turned back to her, his eyes searching hers. "I do not want to be your enemy, Lady Juliana," he said. I need your help." His words, spoken with such sincerity, such vulnerability, took her breath away. Help? What help could she possibly offer him? She was his prisoner, his captive. Yet, there was something in his eyes, a plea, a desperation, that made her believe he was genuine. The caged moon, in this moment, felt like a shared burden, a thing they both endured. How can I help you?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for what he was about to say. "Thornwick, it is not a secure holding. There are factions, rebellious elements, people who would see me overthrown, who would see your lands returned to chaos." The guards changed their watch, the scrape and clang of armor oddly grounding. Chapter 5. Scars of the Past. Rhys's words hung in the air, a stark revelation that shattered the fragile peace that had momentarily settled between them. Juliana stared at him, her mind struggling to grasp the implications of his statement. Thornwick unstable? Rebellious factions? It was a possibility she had not fully considered, her focus having been consumed by her own grief and captivity. What factions?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Who would dare defy you?" Rhys turned away from the window, his gaze sweeping across the room, as if searching for hidden enemies. "There are those who remain loyal to your father's memory," he said, his voice low and guarded. "Those who believe that Thornwick should be ruled by a descendant of the old line. Those who resent my presence, my rule." Juliana thought of her uncle, Lord Alaric, her father's younger brother. He had always been ambitious, resentful of her father's position, eager to claim the lordship of Thornwick for himself. Could he be behind this unrest? "My uncle," she said, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. "Lord Alaric. Is he involved?" Rhys hesitated, his gaze meeting hers. "He is a factor," he admitted. "He has influence. He has supporters. But he is not the only one. There are others, more shadowy figures, who operate in the darkness, who stir up dissent, who plot against me." Juliana felt a chill run down her spine. The thought of secret plots, of hidden enemies lurking in the shadows, was terrifying. It made her realize the precariousness of her own situation, the danger that surrounded her, not just from Rhys, but from those who opposed him. "And what do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "How can I possibly help you?" Rhys took a step closer, his presence filling the room, his gaze intense and unwavering. "You know your people, Lady Juliana," he said. "You know their customs, their traditions, their loyalties. You have influence. You can persuade them. You can convince them that I am not their enemy, that I seek only peace, prosperity for Thornwick." He reached out and gently touched her arm, his fingers sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through her. "You can be my ambassador," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with a desperate plea. "My voice among your people. You can help me bridge the gap, heal the wounds, build a future where Thornwick and Lioness can coexist in peace." Juliana stared at him, her mind reeling. He was asking her to betray her own people, to collaborate with their conqueror, to become a traitor to her father's memory. It was an impossible request, a betrayal of everything she held dear. I cannot," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I cannot betray my people, my family." Rhys's hand tightened on her arm, his grip firm, yet not painful. "You would not be betraying them, Lady Juliana," he said, his voice urgent, persuasive. "You would be saving them. You would be preventing further bloodshed, further suffering. You would be helping to build a better future for them, for all of us." He released her arm and stepped back, his gaze searching hers. "I know this is a difficult choice," he said, "but I believe you are strong enough, wise enough, to make the right decision. I believe you are more than just a captive. You are a leader, a woman of influence, a woman who can make a difference." His words, spoken with such conviction, such belief in her, resonated deep within her soul. He saw something in her, something she had not even seen in herself. He saw a strength, a potential, that she had thought had been crushed by her grief and captivity. But the scars of the past, the wounds of loss and betrayal, ran deep. Could she truly trust him? Could she believe his promises of peace and prosperity? Could she betray her father's memory, even if it meant saving her people? She looked into his green eyes, searching for any hint of deception, any sign of manipulation. But she saw only sincerity, a desperate plea for help, a vulnerability that surprised her. She saw a man haunted by his own past, scarred by his own losses, struggling to build a future out of the ruins of war. She remembered his words about his wife, her death in childbirth. She remembered the pain in his eyes, the sadness that had echoed her own. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a common ground between them, a shared humanity that could transcend the boundaries of conqueror and captive. "I need time," she said, her voice trembling. "I need time to think, to understand." Rhys nodded, his gaze softening. "I understand," he said. "Take all the time you need. But know this, Lady Juliana, I am not your enemy. And I believe that, together, we can build a better future for both our peoples." He turned and walked towards the door, leaving her alone with her thoughts, her doubts, and the weight of a decision that could change the course of her life, the fate of Thornwick and the future of two kingdoms. Outside, the first hint of dawn light began to paint the edge of the sky in hues of gold and rose. Chapter 6. The Price of Freedom. The days that followed were a blur of new experiences, of conflicting emotions, of constant internal struggle. Juliana was treated with a respect that bordered on deference, yet she was never allowed to forget that she was a prisoner, a captive of Rhys Montrose. She was given free rein of the castle, allowed to explore its labyrinthine corridors, its vast library, its beautiful, if somewhat neglected, gardens. She was attended by Alara, who proved to be a surprisingly loyal and insightful companion, offering snippets of information about Rhys, about the castle, about the complex web of loyalties and rivalries that defined life within its walls. Juliana spent hours in the library, poring over ancient texts, seeking solace in the wisdom of the past, searching for answers to the questions that plagued her present. She read of great queens, of women who had wielded power and influence, of women who had navigated treacherous political landscapes with courage and grace. She read of wars and rebellions, of treaties and betrayals, of the constant struggle for power and survival that had shaped the history of her land. She also spent time in the gardens, seeking refuge in the beauty of nature, in the quiet serenity of the blooming flowers, the rustling leaves, the singing birds. She found a small, secluded alcove, hidden behind a wall of climbing roses, where she could sit and think and allow herself to feel the grief that still gnawed at her heart. But even in these moments of solitude, she was never truly alone. Rhys was a constant presence, a shadow that followed her every move. He would often join her in the library, engaging her in discussions about history, about philosophy, about the challenges of ruling a kingdom. He would walk with her in the gardens, pointing out the different varieties of flowers, sharing stories about his childhood, about his dreams for the future. He never pressured her, never demanded an answer to his request. He simply waited. Patiently, persistently, he chipped away at her defenses, her resistance, her anger. He showed her a different side of himself, a side that was surprisingly gentle, intelligent, even vulnerable. He spoke of his desire for peace, for stability, for a future where Thornwick and Lyonesse could prosper together. He also showed her the challenges he faced. He introduced her to his advisors, his knights, the men who formed the core of his power. She saw the divisions among them, the simmering resentments, the barely concealed ambitions. She heard the whispers of discontent, the rumors of rebellion, the threats that lurked in the shadows. She began to understand the weight of his responsibilities, the burden of leadership, the constant pressure to maintain control, to protect his people, to secure his rule. She saw the toll it took on him, the lines of weariness etched on his face, the shadows beneath his eyes, the constant vigilance that never allowed him to truly relax. One evening, as they sat together in the great hall, watching the flames dance in the massive fireplace, Rhys turned to her, his green eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Have you considered my offer, Lady Juliana?" he asked, his voice low and hesitant. Juliana hesitated. She had spent weeks wrestling with her conscience, torn between her loyalty to her father's memory and her desire to protect her people. She had seen the potential for good in Rhys, the possibility of a peaceful future. But she had also seen the danger, the risk, the potential for betrayal. "I have," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "And I have reached a decision." Rhys leaned forward, his gaze intense, his entire being focused on her. "And what is that decision?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Juliana took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I will help you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I will speak to my people. I will try to persuade them to accept your rule. But on one condition." Rhys's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "A condition?" he asked. Juliana nodded. "My freedom," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I will help you, but in return, you must promise me my freedom. Not immediately, perhaps, but eventually. When Thornwick is stable, when the threat of rebellion is gone, when you no longer need me, you must allow me to leave. To return to what remains of my life." It was a bold demand, a risky gamble. She was asking him to relinquish his control over her, to trust her, a woman he had conquered, a woman who had every reason to hate him. Rhys stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on his face, making it difficult to discern his thoughts, his emotions. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and resonant. "Your freedom," he repeated, as if testing the words on his tongue. "A high price, Lady Juliana. It is the only price I will accept," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Very well," he said. "I agree. Your freedom, in exchange for your help. When Thornwick is stable, when peace is secured, you'll be free to go." It was a promise, a vow, spoken in the presence of the ancient stones of the castle, witnessed by the flickering flames of the fire. It was a bargain struck between conqueror and captive, a fragile truce built on a foundation of mutual need, of shared hope, of a desperate desire for peace. Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of rain, a promise of cleansing and renewal. Chapter 7. A Dance of Shadows. The agreement struck, a new dynamic took hold. Juliana was no longer simply a captive, she was a partner, albeit a reluctant one, in Rhys's efforts to pacify Thornwick. He began to include her in his council meetings, seeking her advice on matters relating to her former lands and people. He treated her with a respect that bordered on equality, listening to her opinions, valuing her insights, even deferring to her judgment on occasion. This shift in their relationship was subtle, yet profound. It was a dance of shadows, a careful maneuvering around the unspoken tensions, the lingering resentments, the ever-present awareness of their vastly different positions. They were allies, yet they were also former enemies. They were partners, yet they were also captor and captive. Juliana found herself increasingly drawn into the intricacies of court life, the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined Rhys's world. She learned to navigate the treacherous currents of courtly intrigue, to decipher the hidden meanings behind veiled words, to identify the true loyalties and hidden agendas of those around her. She also began to see Rhys in a new light. She witnessed his unwavering dedication to his people, his tireless efforts to maintain order, his genuine desire for peace. She saw his vulnerability, his moments of doubt, his reliance on her judgment, her support. She began to understand the burden he carried, the weight of responsibility that rested on his shoulders. But the path to peace was not easy. There were those who resisted her efforts, who clung to their loyalty to her father, who saw her as a traitor, a collaborator. She faced hostility, suspicion, even threats. She was forced to walk a tightrope, balancing her desire to help Rhys with her need to maintain her credibility among her own people. One particularly tense encounter occurred during a visit to a small village on the outskirts of Thornwick. Juliana had accompanied Rhys on a tour of the region, hoping to assess the mood of the people, to address their concerns, to reassure them of Rhys's good intentions. As they entered the village square, they were met with a hostile silence. The villagers, their faces grim and resentful, stared at them with a mixture of fear and defiance. An elderly woman, her face etched with wrinkles, her eyes filled with a burning hatred, stepped forward. "Traitor," she spat, her voice cracking with emotion. "You have betrayed your father, your people. You have sided with the enemy." Juliana flinched at the accusation, the words striking her like a physical blow. She felt the eyes of the villagers upon her, judging her, condemning her. Rhys stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "She is here to help you," he said, his voice firm and commanding. "She is here to ensure your safety, your prosperity. We need no help from you, Lion of Lioness." The woman retorted, "We want our freedom. We want Thornwick returned to its rightful heirs." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Juliana felt a wave of despair wash over her. It seemed that her efforts were futile, that the hatred, the resentment, were too deeply ingrained to overcome. But then a young man, barely more than a boy, stepped forward. He was the son of the village elder, a man who had been a close friend of Juliana's father. "My father trusted her," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "He believed in her. He would have wanted us to listen to her." The crowd fell silent, their gazes shifting from Juliana to the young man. He had spoken with a sincerity, a conviction, that resonated with them. He had reminded them of their loyalty to her father, of their trust in his judgment. Juliana seized the opportunity. She stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "I understand your anger, your resentment," she said. "I share your grief, your loss. But I also believe that there is a better way. A way to avoid further bloodshed, further suffering. A way to build a future where Thornwick can thrive, where our people can live in peace." She spoke with passion, with conviction, drawing on her own experiences, her own grief, her own hopes for the future. She spoke of Rhys's good intentions, of his commitment to justice, of his desire to work with them, not against them. Slowly, gradually, the mood of the crowd began to shift. The hostility, the resentment, began to dissipate, replaced by a tentative curiosity, a glimmer of hope. They listened to her. They questioned her. They challenged her. But they also heard her. By the time Juliana and Rhys left the village, the atmosphere had changed completely. The villagers were no longer hostile, no longer defiant. They were cautiously optimistic. They had not fully embraced Rhys, not yet. But they had agreed to consider his offer. They had agreed to give peace a chance. As they rode back to the castle, Rhys turned to Juliana, his green eyes filled with gratitude. "You did well," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with emotion. "You saved the day. You have a gift, Lady Juliana. A gift for persuasion. A gift for healing." Juliana felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of accomplishment, of purpose. She had made a difference. She had helped to bridge the gap, to heal the wounds. She had taken a step, however small, towards a better future. The dance of shadows continued, but now there was a glimmer of light, a hint of hope, in the darkness. The wind played across the plains, carrying with it the sounds of distant voices raised not in anger, but in discussion. Chapter 8. Oaths sworn in blood. The success in the village, while encouraging, proved to be only a small victory in a larger, more complex struggle. Juliana continued her efforts to win over the hearts and minds of the people of Thornwick, traveling to different villages, meeting with local leaders, addressing their concerns, reassuring them of Rhys's good intentions. She spoke of her agreement with Rhys, of his promise of her eventual freedom, using it as a symbol of his commitment to a future where Thornwick would retain a degree of autonomy. But the whispers of rebellion persisted. Lord Alaric, Juliana's uncle, remained a constant threat, his ambition fueled by resentment and a thirst for power. He continued to gather support, to plot in secret, to undermine Rhys's authority at every turn. Rhys, aware of Alaric's machinations, grew increasingly frustrated, increasingly impatient. He had hoped that Juliana's influence would be enough to quell the unrest, to bring Alaric to heel. But it was becoming clear that more drastic measures might be necessary. One evening, after a particularly tense council meeting, where reports of Alaric's growing influence had dominated the discussion, Rhys summoned Juliana to his private chambers. He was pacing restlessly when she arrived, his face etched with worry, his eyes filled with a troubled intensity. "He is growing bolder," Rhys said, his voice tight with frustration. "Alaric. He is openly defying me, gathering support, spreading rumors, inciting rebellion." Juliana nodded, her own concern mirroring his. She had heard the whispers, felt the growing tension, sensed the danger that Alaric posed. What do you intend to do?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Rhys stopped pacing and turned to face her, his green eyes piercing through her. "I have tried diplomacy," he said. "I have tried persuasion. I have offered him concessions, offered him a place in my council. But he refuses. He wants only one thing, Thornwick, and he will stop at nothing to get it." He took a deep breath, his jaw tightening with resolve. "I have no choice," he said. "I must eliminate the threat. I must deal with Alaric." Juliana felt a chill run down her spine. She knew what he meant. "Deal with him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How?" Rhys's gaze hardened. "There is only one way to deal with a traitor," he said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "He must be removed." Juliana stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She understood the logic, the necessity, of his decision. Alaric was a danger, a threat to peace, to stability. But he was also her uncle, her father's brother, a member of her family. "You would kill him?" she asked, the words barely a whisper. Rhys did not answer immediately. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames in the fireplace. He seemed to be wrestling with his own conscience, his own doubts. "It is not a decision I take lightly," he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "But I have a duty to protect my people, to secure my rule. I cannot allow Alaric to continue his treachery." He turned back to her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "I need your understanding," he said. "Your support. This is not just about me, about my power. It is about the future of Thornwick, about the safety of your people." Juliana felt torn. She understood his reasoning, his justification. But the thought of her uncle's death, of another act of violence, filled her with dread. "There must be another way," she said, her voice pleading. "Can you not imprison him? Exile him?" Rhys shook his head. He would only continue to plot, to scheme, to stir up rebellion, even from afar. He is too dangerous to be left alive. He reached out and took her hands, his grip firm, yet gentle. "I know this is difficult for you, Lady Juliana," he said, his voice softening. "But I swear to you, I will do everything in my power to make it as painless as possible. It will be swift, clean. He will not suffer." His words, meant to reassure her, only served to heighten her anxiety. She pulled her hands away, her body trembling. I cannot condone this," she said, her voice shaking. "I cannot support you in this." Rhys's face fell, his eyes clouding with disappointment. "I had hoped," he began, but then he stopped himself. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Very well," he said. "I understand. I will not ask you to betray your family. But I must do what I believe is right, what is necessary." He turned and walked towards a table where a flagon of wine and 2 goblets sat. He poured himself a drink, his hand shaking slightly. "There is something else," he said, his voice barely audible. "Something you should know." He took a long drink of wine, then turned back to her, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and regret. "Alaric, he is not acting alone," he said. "He has allies. Powerful allies. Allies who have sworn an oath to him, an oath in blood." The air thickened, the very stones of the castle seeming to hold their breath. Chapter 9. The Serpent's Kiss. Rhys's revelation struck Juliana like a physical blow. Alaric's allies? Powerful allies? Who could they be? And what did he mean by an oath in blood? The phrase conjured images of dark rituals, of forbidden pacts, of a conspiracy that reached far beyond the walls of Thornwick. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her mind racing with 1,000 terrifying possibilities. "Who are these allies?" Rhys hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. He seemed reluctant to speak, as if the very words were poison in his mouth. "There are rumors," he said, his voice low and guarded. "Whispers. Of a secret society. A brotherhood. Bound by ancient oaths. Oaths of loyalty. Of vengeance." He looked up at her, his green eyes filled with a troubled intensity. "They call themselves the Serpent's Fang," he said. "And they are formidable. Ruthless. They have influence. In high places. The Serpent's Fang." The name itself sent a shiver of dread down Juliana's spine. She had heard whispers of such a society, of a shadowy organization that operated in the darkness, that pulled the strings of power, that manipulated events to their own advantage. But she had always dismissed them as mere rumors, as fanciful tales told to frighten children. I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "How can such a society exist? How can they have such power?" Rhys sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They have existed for centuries," he said. "Their roots run deep. They have infiltrated the courts, the councils, the very fabric of our society. They are everywhere and nowhere." He took another drink of wine, his hand shaking slightly. "They are bound by blood oaths," he continued. "Oaths of secrecy, of loyalty, of obedience. To betray them is to die. A slow, painful death." Juliana felt a growing sense of horror, of helplessness. It was as if she were trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by hidden enemies, by forces she could not comprehend, could not control. "And Alaric is a member?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Rhys nodded. "He is high-ranking," he said. "He has influence within the society. He has used their power, their resources, to further his own ambitions." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "This is why I must act," he said. "This is why I must eliminate him. He is not just a rebellious lord. He is a serpent. A poisonous serpent that threatens to destroy everything." Juliana understood now the full extent of the danger, the complexity of the situation. It was not just a personal feud between Rhys and Alaric. It was a battle against a powerful, secret society, a struggle for the very soul of the kingdom. "But if you kill him," she said, her voice trembling, "will they not retaliate? Will they not seek vengeance?" Rhys nodded grimly. "They will," he said. "But I have precautions. I have allies of my own. Allies who are aware of the serpent's fang. Allies who are prepared to fight them." He took a deep breath, his jaw tightening with resolve. "It will be a war," he said. "A hidden war. A war fought in the shadows. But it is a war I must fight. For the sake of my people. For the sake of the future." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "I need your help, Lady Juliana," he said. "More than ever. I need you to be my eyes, my ears. To help me identify the members of the Serpent's Fang. To help me uncover their plots. To help me defeat them." It was a daunting request, a dangerous task. He was asking her to become a spy, an informant, to risk her life in a deadly game of intrigue and betrayal. But she also understood the stakes, the importance of her role. She could not stand idly by while a secret society threatened to destroy everything she held dear. She met his gaze, her own eyes hardening with resolve. "I will help you," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I will do whatever it takes. But you must promise me something." Rhys's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. "Anything," he said. If you capture any members of the Serpent's Fang," she said, "you will not torture them. You will not inflict unnecessary suffering. You will treat them with justice. With mercy." It was a bold demand, a challenge to his authority. But she could not condone cruelty, even in the face of such a threat. Rhys stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I promise," he said. "Justice. And mercy. Where possible." It was a qualified promise, but it was enough. She had his word, and she would hold him to it. Outside, thunder rumbled, a distant echo of the storm that was brewing within the castle walls, within the kingdom, within her own heart. Chapter 10. Beyond the castle walls. With the pact renewed and the stakes raised, Juliana found herself thrust into a world of espionage and intrigue. Rhys, trusting her with a level of confidence that both flattered and frightened her, tasked her with gathering information, with identifying potential members of the Serpent's Fang, with uncovering their plots and schemes. It was a dangerous game, a delicate dance of deception and deduction. She had to be constantly vigilant, constantly observant, constantly aware of the hidden meanings behind every word, every gesture, every interaction. She had to learn to read the subtle cues, the unspoken signals, the veiled threats that pass between those who might be involved in the conspiracy. Alara, surprisingly, proved to be an invaluable asset. Her seemingly innocent position as a servant gave her access to information, to whispers and rumors that would have been otherwise unavailable to Juliana. She had a keen eye for detail, a sharp ear for gossip, and a surprisingly shrewd understanding of the power dynamics within the castle. The steward, Lord Balder, Alara whispered one evening as she helped Juliana prepare for bed. "He has been meeting secretly, with strangers, late at night, in the old chapel." The old chapel, a small, disused sanctuary located in a remote part of the castle, had been abandoned for years. It was a perfect place for clandestine meetings, for secret rendezvous. Juliana felt a surge of excitement, a flicker of hope. Could Lord Balder, the seemingly harmless steward, be a member of the Serpent's Fang? It was a possibility, a lead that she had to pursue. She reported her findings to Rhys, who listened intently, his face grim, his eyes narrowed in thought. "We must observe him," Rhys said. "We must gather evidence. We cannot act without proof." He assigned a trusted knight, Sir Kalen, a man known for his loyalty and discretion, to keep watch on Lord Balder, to monitor his movements, to report any suspicious activity. In the meantime, Juliana continued her own investigations, expanding her network of informants, cultivating relationships with those who might be able to provide her with valuable information. She attended court functions, engaged in polite conversations, listened to the gossip, the rumors, the innuendos that swirled around her. She also began to venture outside the castle walls, accompanied by a small escort of Rhys's guards, to visit the surrounding villages, to interact with the local people, to gather intelligence from the ground up. She used her position as Rhys's ambassador to gain access to places, to people that would have been otherwise off limits to her. During one such visit, she encountered a traveling merchant, a man who claimed to have connections throughout the kingdom, who boasted of his knowledge of secret societies, of hidden conspiracies. He was a flamboyant character, dressed in brightly colored silks, his fingers adorned with numerous rings, his voice loud and boastful. "The serpent's fang," he said, leaning in conspiratorially, his breath reeking of wine and garlic. "They are everywhere, my lady. They have their claws in every pie. They control everything." Juliana, though skeptical of his claims, listened patiently, encouraging him to talk, to reveal whatever information he might possess. She learned of their rituals, their symbols, their methods of communication. She learned of their network of informants, their spies, their assassins. She also learned of a planned meeting, a gathering of high-ranking members of the Serpent's Fang, to be held in a remote forest clearing under the cover of darkness. It was a risky undertaking, a dangerous venture, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to gather valuable intelligence, to identify key players in the conspiracy. She reported her findings to Rhys, who listened with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "It is dangerous," he said. "Too dangerous. I cannot allow you to risk your life." But Juliana was adamant. "I must go," she said. "It is an opportunity we cannot afford to miss. I can gather evidence. I can identify them. I can help you defeat them." Rhys hesitated, his gaze searching hers. He saw the determination in her eyes, the unwavering resolve, the courage that burned within her. "Very well," he said finally, his voice filled with a mixture of reluctance and admiration. "But you will not go alone. I will accompany you. And we will take precautions. We will be prepared." Outside the castle walls, under the quiet, watchful presence of the night, a different part of the plan began to take shape. Chapter 11. A Tapestry of Lies. The journey to the forest clearing was fraught with tension. Juliana and Rhys, disguised as simple travelers, rode alongside a small, hand-picked group of Rhys's most trusted knights, also in disguise. They traveled under the cover of darkness, avoiding the main roads, sticking to hidden paths, their senses constantly on alert. The air was thick with anticipation, with a sense of impending danger. Juliana felt a knot of fear in her stomach, a constant awareness of the risks they were taking. But she also felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of purpose, a determination to see this through. As they neared the clearing, they dismounted, tethering their horses in a secluded grove of trees. They proceeded on foot, moving silently through the dense undergrowth, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. The clearing, when they finally reached it, was bathed in the eerie glow of a half-moon. A large fire burned in the center, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. Around the fire, a group of figures were gathered, their faces hidden by hooded cloaks, their voices low and hushed. Juliana and Rhys, concealed behind a thick cluster of bushes, watched and listened, their hearts pounding in their chests. They recognized some of the figures. Lord Alaric, of course, was there, his face a mask of cruel ambition. Lord Balder, the steward, was also present, his demeanor surprisingly confident, almost arrogant. But there were others, figures they did not recognize, men and women of high standing, judging by their rich clothing, their authoritative bearing. They spoke of plots and schemes, of alliances and betrayals, of their plans to overthrow Rhys, to restore Thornwick to its rightful rulers. Juliana, her mind racing, took mental notes, memorizing faces, voices, details. She recognized a symbol, a serpent coiled around a dagger, embroidered on the cloaks of several of the figures. It was the emblem of the Serpent's Fang, a confirmation of their involvement in the conspiracy. As the meeting progressed, the discussion turned to Juliana. "The woman," Alaric said, his voice filled with venom. "She is a problem. She is influencing Rhys. She is turning him against us. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. She must be eliminated, another figure said, his voice cold and ruthless. She is a threat to our plans. Juliana felt a chill run down her spine. She had known she was in danger, but to hear them plotting her death, so casually, so callously, was terrifying. Rhys, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword, leaned closer to Juliana. "We must leave," he whispered.
"Now.
"Before they discover us." But Juliana shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered back. "We need more. We need evidence. We need names." She continued to watch, to listen, to gather information, even as her fear grew. She was playing a dangerous game, walking a tightrope between discovery and disaster. Suddenly, one of the figures, a tall, imposing man with a scarred face, turned his head, his gaze sweeping across the clearing. He seemed to sense their presence, to feel their eyes upon him.
"Who is there?"
he demanded, his voice sharp and commanding. The other figures turned, their heads snapping up, their hands reaching for their weapons. Rhys, realizing they had been discovered, drew his sword.
"Now,"
he shouted. "We go now." He grabbed Juliana's hand and pulled her away from the bushes, running back towards the horses, the other knights following close behind. The figures in the clearing, realizing they had been spied upon, gave chase, their shouts echoing through the forest. It was a desperate flight, a race against time, a struggle for survival. Juliana, her heart pounding, her lungs burning, ran as fast as she could, Rhys by her side, protecting her, guiding her, urging her on. They reached the horses, mounted quickly, and galloped away, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. They rode through the night, their adrenaline pumping, their fear a constant companion. They did not stop until they reached the safety of the castle walls, the gates closing behind them, shutting out the darkness, the danger, the threat of the serpent's fang. They had escaped, but they had also been exposed. The tapestry of lies, woven so carefully in the darkness, had begun to unravel. The fire in the clearing faded, the distant sounds of the forest like a warning. Chapter 12. Echoes in the Great Hall. The aftermath of the near-disastrous encounter in the forest clearing reverberated through the castle. Rhys, shaken by the close call and enraged by the serpent's fang's blatant plotting, doubled the guard, tightened security, and ordered a thorough investigation of all those suspected of involvement in the conspiracy. Juliana, though still shaken by the experience, found herself strangely invigorated. She had faced danger, stared death in the face, and emerged stronger, more determined than ever to fight back. She had seen the enemy, heard their plans, witnessed their ruthlessness. She knew what they were capable of, and she would not let them win. The information she had gathered during the meeting proved to be invaluable. She was able to identify several key members of the Serpent's Fang, including some high-ranking officials within Rhys's own court. The names she provided, the details she recalled, sent shockwaves through the castle, shattering alliances, exposing hidden loyalties, and unleashing a wave of paranoia and suspicion. Lord Balder, the steward, was arrested, his treachery exposed. He confessed under interrogation, revealing the names of other conspirators, detailing their plans, and confirming Alaric's leadership role in the organization. But Alaric himself remained elusive. He had vanished after the meeting in the forest, disappearing without a trace. Rhys suspected he had fled to his own stronghold, a heavily fortified castle located in a remote, mountainous region bordering Thornwick. The tension within the castle was palpable. Everyone was suspect, everyone was watched, everyone was on edge. The Great Hall, once a place of feasts and celebrations, now echoed with whispers and rumors, with accusations and denials. Juliana, despite the danger, found herself drawn to the Great Hall, to the center of the storm. She felt a need to be present, to observe, to listen, to gather information. She also felt a growing sense of responsibility, a need to protect Rhys, to help him navigate this treacherous landscape. One evening, as she sat near the fireplace, Watching the flames dance, she noticed a group of knights engaged in a heated discussion. They were speaking in hushed tones, their faces grim, their eyes darting around nervously. She recognized one of them, Sir Gareth, a young knight who had always been friendly towards her, who had shown her kindness and respect. She approached him cautiously, her senses on alert. "Sir Gareth," she said softly, "is something amiss?" The knights stopped talking abruptly, their gazes shifting to her, their expressions wary. Sir Gareth hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "It is nothing, my lady," he said, forcing a smile.
Just court gossip.
But Juliana did not believe him. She had seen the fear in their eyes, heard the tension in their voices. She sensed that something was wrong, something more than just gossip. "Please, Sir Gareth," she said, her voice gentle, yet persistent. "You can trust me. I am on your side." Sir Gareth looked at her for a long moment, his gaze searching hers. He seemed to be wrestling with his conscience, his loyalty torn between his duty to Rhys and his fear of the Serpent's Fang. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "There's a plot," he said. "A plot to assassinate Lord Montrose." Juliana felt a jolt of fear, a cold dread that gripped her heart. She had expected this, anticipated it, but to hear it confirmed, to know that Rhys's life was in imminent danger, was terrifying.
"When?"
she asked, her voice trembling.
"How?"
Sir Gareth hesitated again, his eyes darting around nervously.
"Tonight," he said.
During the evening meal, they planned to poison his wine.
Poison.
The insidious weapon of cowards, of those who dared not face their enemies in open combat. It was a cruel, treacherous way to die. Juliana felt a surge of anger, of righteous indignation. She would not allow this to happen. She would not let them kill Rhys. "Who?" she asked, her voice firm, demanding. "Who is behind this?" Sir Gareth looked at her, his eyes filled with fear and regret. "I cannot say," he whispered. "They would kill me. They would kill my family." Juliana understood his fear, his reluctance to betray his fellow knights. But she also knew that Rhys's life was at stake. "You must tell me," she said, her voice pleading. "Please, Sir Gareth, help me save him." He looked at her for another long moment, his internal struggle evident in his face. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Sir Callan," he whispered, the name barely audible. "He is the one. He is the Serpent's Fang. Sir Callan, the trusted knight, the man Rhys had assigned to guard Lord Balder, the man who had seemed so loyal, so dependable." It was a shocking revelation, a betrayal that cut deep. The echoes in the great hall seemed to increase, amplifying and distorting sounds. "A toast!" rang a voice, and silence suddenly befell. Chapter 13. The Heart's Rebellion. The announcement of a toast shattered the tense silence, sending a wave of dread through Juliana. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was at the moment of the assassination attempt. Sir Callan, the trusted knight, was about to make his move. She looked around the great hall, her eyes searching for Rhys. He was standing at the high table, surrounded by his advisors and knights, his face relaxed, unsuspecting. He was holding a goblet of wine, about to raise it in a toast. Juliana's heart pounded in her chest. She had to act quickly, had to warn him before it was too late. But how? She couldn't simply shout out, accuse Sir Callan in front of everyone. It would cause chaos, panic, and might even give Callan the opportunity to strike in the confusion. She had to be subtle, discreet, had to find a way to reach Rhys without alerting Callan or the other conspirators. She scanned the room, her mind racing, searching for a solution. Her gaze fell upon Alara, who was standing near the serving table, holding a tray of food. An idea sparked in Juliana's mind, a desperate plan, of a risky gamble. She moved quickly towards Alara, her steps purposeful, her expression urgent. "Alara," she whispered, her voice low and intense. "I need your help. It is a matter of life and death." Alara, her eyes widening with alarm, nodded immediately. "Anything, my lady," she said. "What do you need?" Juliana quickly explained the situation, outlining her plan, emphasizing the urgency. the danger. Alara listened intently, her face pale, her hands trembling, but her resolve unwavering.
I will do it, she said.
I will save him. Juliana gave her a grateful nod, then turned back towards the high table. Sir Calin was raising his own goblet, his eyes fixed on Rhys, a sinister smile playing on his lips. Rhys raised his goblet, about to drink. My lord, Juliana called out, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the murmur of conversation. Everyone turned to look at her, their expressions curious, surprised. Rhys lowered his goblet, his gaze meeting hers, a question in his eyes. Juliana walked towards him, her steps deliberate, her demeanor calm, yet purposeful. She had to play this carefully, had to make it seem natural, unforced. Forgive me, my lord, she said, her voice slightly apologetic. But I have a request.
A tradition.
From Thornwick. Rhys frowned slightly, his brow furrowed in confusion.
A tradition?
He asked. Juliana nodded. Yes, my lord, she said. Before we drink, before we celebrate, we exchange goblets. As a symbol of trust, of unity. It was a lie, of course. There was no such tradition in Thornwick. But it was a plausible lie, a believable excuse. And it was her only chance. Rhys hesitated, his gaze flickering from Juliana to Sir Calin, who was watching them intently, his face a mask of barely concealed anger. I have never heard of such a tradition, Rhys said, his voice uncertain. It is an old tradition, Juliana said, her voice persuasive. A forgotten tradition. But I would be honored, my lord, if you would indulge me. She held out her hand, her eyes pleading with him, silently urging him to trust her, to understand. Rhys looked at her for a long moment, his green eyes searching hers. He saw the urgency, the desperation, the unspoken plea. He sensed that something was wrong, something more than just a forgotten tradition. He nodded slowly.
Very well, he said.
If it pleases you, Lady Juliana. He extended his goblet towards her, and Juliana, with a trembling hand, offered him hers. They exchanged goblets, their fingers brushing briefly. Juliana took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. She raised the goblet, Rhys's goblet, the poisoned goblet, to her lips. Sir Calin, his eyes widening in horror, took a step forward, his hand reaching for his sword.
No,
he shouted. But it was too late. Juliana had already taken a sip. Or so they all thought. In a maneuver that surprised all present, she did not drink, but instead poured out the contents slowly, dramatically, so that the dark liquid splattered across the stone floor with a finality that stunned the crowd. Silence befell the great hall, the air so still a person might imagine they could hear their own blood flowing. Then, after a moment of consideration, Juliana spoke. It seems, she announced, that unity is not to be had this night. For there are snakes among us who would rather kill than commune. Chaos erupted, the moment of strained courtesy fractured. Now, by a deeper, more insidious break. Chapter 14. Fire and Steel. The instant the poisoned wine splashed across the stone floor, the great hall exploded into chaos. Knights drew their swords, accusations flew, and the air crackled with tension and the threat of imminent violence. Sir Calin, his treachery exposed, roared in defiance and lunged at Rhys, his sword flashing in the firelight. Rhys, though momentarily stunned by Juliana's actions and Calin's betrayal, reacted with the speed and agility of a seasoned warrior. He sidestepped Calin's attack, drew his own sword, and parried the blow, the clash of steel echoing through the hall. The other knights, their loyalties divided, hesitated for a moment, unsure of whom to support. Some, loyal to Rhys, moved to defend him, while others, secretly aligned with the Serpent's Fang, joined Calin's attack. The great hall became a battlefield, a swirling melee of fighting men, the clash of steel, the shouts of anger, the screams of the wounded filling the air. Tables were overturned, goblets shattered, and the floor became slick with spilled wine and blood. Juliana, caught in the midst of the chaos, found herself swept up in a tide of violence. She had no weapon, no training in combat, but she refused to cower, to be a passive victim. She used her wits, her agility, to dodge the swinging swords, to avoid the crush of bodies, to stay alive. She saw Alara, her face pale with terror, hiding behind a tapestry, her eyes wide with fear. Juliana, her heart pounding, moved towards her, shielding her, protecting her. "Stay here," she shouted above the din. "Stay hidden. It will be all right." Alara nodded, her body trembling, her hands clutching the fabric of the tapestry. Juliana turned back to the fight, her eyes searching for Rhys. She saw him engaged in a fierce duel with Kaelin, their swords flashing, their bodies locked in a deadly embrace. Rhys was a skilled swordsman, strong and agile, but Kaelin was younger, faster, and fueled by a desperate rage. The fight raged back and forth, across the hall, the two men evenly matched, their skills honed by years of training, of battle. But Kaelin, driven by the knowledge that his treachery had been exposed, fought with a ferocity, a recklessness, that gave him an edge. He managed to disarm Rhys, his sword sending Rhys's weapon clattering across the floor. Rhys, momentarily defenseless, stumbled back, his eyes widening in alarm. Kaelin, seeing his opportunity, raised his sword for the killing blow. Juliana, her heart stopping in her chest, screamed, "No!" She lunged forward, throwing herself between Kaelin and Rhys, shielding him with her own body. Kaelin, surprised by her sudden intervention, hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was all the time Rhys needed. He rolled to the side, grabbing a discarded dagger from the floor, and lunged at Kaelin, plunging the blade into his side. Kaelin gasped, his eyes widening in shock and pain. He staggered back, his sword dropping from his hand, his body collapsing to the floor. The fight, which had seemed to last an eternity, was over in an instant. The chaos in the great hall subsided, the clash of steel replaced by a stunned silence. Rhys, his chest heaving, his face covered in sweat and blood, stared at Juliana, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock, gratitude, and something else. Something deeper, something more profound. He reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. You saved me," he said, his voice hoarse and unsteady. Juliana, her body trembling, her heart still pounding, nodded slowly. I could not let him kill you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Rhys pulled her close, embracing her tightly, his arms holding her as if he would never let her go. He buried his face in her hair, his body shaking with the force of his emotions. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Juliana. You are extraordinary." They stood there for a long moment, locked in an embrace, the chaos around them fading into insignificance. The fire in the hearth crackled and popped, the only sound breaking the silence, a testament to the fiery ordeal they had just endured and the steel resolve they had both shown. The smell of iron, wine, and sweat intermingled, all sharp indicators of recent danger. Chapter 15. A Kingdom Divided. The attempted assassination and Kaelin's death marked a turning point. The simmering tensions, the hidden conspiracies, erupted into open conflict. The Serpent's Fong, their plot exposed, their leader in hiding, launched a full-scale rebellion, plunging Thornwick and the surrounding regions into chaos. Villages were raided, castles besieged, and loyalties were tested to their breaking point. The kingdom was divided, neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother, as those loyal to Rhys clashed with those who supported Alaric and the Serpent's Fong. Rhys, though shaken by the betrayal of one of his most trusted knights, responded with swift and decisive action. He rallied his loyal forces, gathered his allies, and prepared for war. He rode from castle to castle, bolstering defenses, encouraging his troops, and vowing to crush the rebellion. Juliana, despite her lack of military experience, remained by his side, offering her support, her counsel, her unwavering loyalty. She had chosen her path, cast her lot with Rhys, and she would not waver, even in the face of such overwhelming adversity. She used her knowledge of Thornwick, of its people, of its terrain, to advise Rhys on strategy, on tactics, on how to win the hearts and minds of those who were still undecided. She traveled with him, sharing his hardships, his dangers, his triumphs. She also continued her efforts to identify and expose members of the Serpent's Fang, working tirelessly to uncover their plots, to disrupt their communications, to weaken their hold on the kingdom. She became a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope for those who opposed the rebellion, a figure of both admiration and fear. The war was brutal, bloody, and protracted. There were victories and defeats, moments of triumph and despair. The landscape was scarred by battle, the fields littered with the dead, the castles bearing the marks of siege and assault. Juliana witnessed the horrors of war firsthand, the suffering, the destruction, the loss of life. She saw villages burned to the ground, families torn apart, innocent people caught in the crossfire. The experience hardened her, strengthened her resolve, but it also filled her with a deep sadness, a profound sense of loss. One particularly devastating battle took place near the borders of Thornwick, at a strategic pass that controlled access to the heart of the kingdom. Rhys's forces, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, were on the verge of defeat. Juliana, watching from a nearby hilltop, felt a surge of despair, a sense of impending doom. She saw Rhys, his armor battered, his face covered in blood and grime, fighting valiantly, but she knew it was not enough. She could not stand idly by and watch him die, watch her people be slaughtered. She had to do something, anything, to help. She remembered a secret passage, a hidden tunnel that led from the nearby forest to the rear of the enemy lines. It was a risky gamble, a desperate maneuver, but it was their only chance. She rode down to the battlefield, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She found Rhys, his sword arm wounded, his forces in disarray. "There is a way," she shouted above the din of battle.
Un secret passage.
"I can lead a detachment through the forest to attack them from behind." Rhys, his eyes filled with exhaustion and desperation, hesitated for a moment. It was a dangerous plan, a reckless gamble. But he also trusted Juliana, trusted her instincts, her knowledge. "Do it," he said, his voice hoarse. "Godspeed, Juliana. And be careful." Juliana gathered a small group of loyal knights, men she knew she could trust, and led them into the forest, towards the hidden passage. It was a perilous journey, fraught with danger, but they moved swiftly, silently, guided by Juliana's knowledge of the terrain. They emerged from the passage behind the enemy lines, surprising them, disrupting their formation, sowing chaos and confusion. The attack from the rear, combined with a renewed assault from Rhys's main force, turned the tide of the battle. The rebels, caught between two fires, their lines broken, their morale shattered, began to falter, to retreat, to surrender. The battle, which had seemed lost, was won. Rhys, his face streaked with tears and blood, embraced Juliana as she returned, his voice filled with gratitude and awe. "You did it," he said. "You saved us. You are incredible." The battlefield, still smoking in places, fell to an exhausted, tattered quiet. Chapter 16. The Weight of a Crown. The victory at the pass, though significant, did not end the war. The Serpent's Fang, though weakened, continued to fight, their rebellion fueled by desperation and a thirst for revenge. Alaric, still at large, remained a rallying point for the rebels, his influence a constant threat. Rhys, weary of the bloodshed, of the constant struggle, began to explore other avenues, other ways to end the conflict. He sent emissaries to the neutral lords, seeking their support, their mediation. He offered amnesty to those rebels who would lay down their arms, promising them forgiveness, a chance to rebuild their lives. Juliana, recognizing the shift in Rhys's approach, supported his efforts wholeheartedly. She used her own influence, her own connections, to reach out to those who were wavering, to persuade them to abandon the rebellion, to embrace peace. She also began to think about the future, about what would happen after the war, about the kind of kingdom she wanted to help build. She envisioned a Thornwick that was prosperous, just, and free, a place where her people could live in peace and security, where the wounds of the past could finally heal. She shared her vision with Rhys, engaging him in long discussions about the future, about governance, about justice, about the responsibilities of leadership. She challenged him, questioned him, pushed him to think beyond the immediate conflict, to consider the long-term consequences of his actions. Rhys, initially resistant to her suggestions, gradually came to appreciate her wisdom, her insight, her unwavering commitment to the well-being of her people. He saw in her a partner, an equal, a woman who could help him shape a better future, not just for Thornwick, but for Lyonesse as well. One evening, as they sat together in his private chambers, studying maps, discussing strategies, Rhys turned to Juliana, his green eyes filled with a mixture of weariness and determination. "This war," he said, his voice low and heavy.
"It has changed me."
"It has shown me the true cost of power, the true weight of a crown." Juliana nodded, her own heart heavy with the same realization. She had seen the toll the war had taken on him, the lines of exhaustion etched on his face, the shadows beneath his eyes, the constant burden of responsibility that weighed him down. "It is a heavy burden," she said softly, "but it is a burden you do not have to carry alone." Rhys looked at her, his gaze searching hers.
"I know," he said.
"And I am grateful for your support, for your counsel, for your friendship." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. The gesture was simple, yet profound, a symbol of their growing bond, their shared commitment, their deepening affection. I have come to rely on you, Juliana," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible. You have become essential to me." Juliana felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling that was both comforting and unsettling. She had grown to respect Rhys, to admire his strength, his resilience, his dedication to his people. She had come to trust him, to rely on him, to see him as a partner, an ally. But she had also begun to feel something more, something deeper, something that she had tried to suppress, to deny. She had begun to care for him.
Deeply.
"And you to me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. They sat there in silence, their hands clasped together, the weight of the crown, the burden of the war, seeming to diminish in the face of their shared connection, their growing love. The fire in the hearth crackled, as though the castle itself were reminding them of the outside, the challenges that still lay outside its walls. Rhys spoke first, his words careful, slow. "When this is over," he began, not looking at her, but out toward the fire. "When Alaric is defeated and peace is restored. What then, Juliana?" Chapter 17. Broken Vows. Rhys's question hung in the air, a delicate, fragile thing, suspended between hope and fear. Juliana hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what he was asking, what he was implying, but she was afraid to speak, afraid to voice the feelings that had been growing within her, blossoming in the midst of war and chaos. She thought of her promise, of Rhys's vow to grant her freedom once the conflict was over. It was a promise she had clung to, a lifeline in the turbulent sea of her captivity. But now, as she looked at Rhys, at his weary face, his earnest eyes, his hand still holding hers, she realized that freedom, true freedom, might lie not in escaping his grasp, but in embracing it. I do not know," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "So much has changed. Since I first came here." Rhys nodded, his gaze still fixed on the flickering flames, his expression thoughtful, almost melancholic. "You were a captive," he said, "a prisoner of war. And I your captor."
"And now?"
Juliana asked, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to face her, his green eyes searching hers, seeking answers, seeking reassurance. "Now you are my advisor," he said, "my confidant, my friend." And he hesitated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And perhaps something more." Juliana's heart ached with a mixture of longing and fear. She had come to care for Rhys deeply, to admire his strength, his compassion, his unwavering commitment to justice. She had seen his vulnerability, his moments of doubt, his capacity for love. She had, against all odds, against all reason, fallen in love with him. But could she allow herself to love him? Could she forget the past, the pain, the loss, the fact that he had conquered her home, killed her father, taken her prisoner? Could she betray her own people, her own family, by embracing the man who had caused them so much suffering? "I cannot forget," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "What happened? To my father. To Thornwick. To my people." Rhys's grip on her hand tightened, his eyes filled with a deep sadness, a profound regret. "I know," he said, "and I cannot undo what has been done. I cannot bring back your father. I cannot erase the pain, the suffering. But I can try to make amends. I can try to build a better future. For Thornwick. For Lioness. For us." He leaned closer, his breath warm on her face, his eyes pleading with her to understand, to believe. "I have come to love you, Juliana," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Against all odds. Against all reason. I love you." The words, spoken with such sincerity, such vulnerability, pierced through Juliana's defenses, shattering her resistance, melting the icy walls around her heart. She had longed to hear those words, dreamed of them, even as she had fought against them. Tears welled up in her eyes, tears of grief, of joy, of confusion, of a love that was both forbidden and undeniable. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of weariness, the scars of battle, the contours of a face that had become so dear to her. "And I love you," she whispered, the words a confession, a surrender, a vow. He pulled her close, embracing her tightly, his body trembling with the force of his emotions. He kissed her, a kiss that was both passionate and tender, a kiss that sealed their love, their commitment, their shared destiny. But even in that moment of profound connection, a shadow of doubt lingered, a reminder of the obstacles they still faced, the challenges that lay ahead. As they broke apart, there came from beyond their chamber a clamor. Shouts, the distinct clang of metal on metal. "What is that?" Juliana asked, sitting up, suddenly aware of the sounds of fighting. Rhys stiffened. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." The two shared a look, knowing that whatever the cause, their moment had passed. Something, somewhere, had broken apart. Chapter 18. Where Shadows Meet. The sounds of fighting grew louder, closer, the clang of steel, the shouts of men, the screams of the wounded echoing through the castle corridors. Rhys grabbed his sword, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of alarm and determination. "Stay here," he commanded Juliana, his voice urgent. "Lock the door. Do not open it. For anyone." But Juliana refused to be left behind, to be sheltered from the danger. She had faced too much, endured too much, to cower in fear now. "No," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I am going with you. I will not be separated from you." Rhys hesitated, his gaze searching hers. He saw the resolve in her eyes, the unwavering loyalty, the courage that burned within her. He knew he could not deny her, could not leave her behind. "Very well," he said, his voice tight with concern. "But stay close to me. And be careful." They left the chambers together, moving quickly through the dimly lit corridors, the sounds of fighting drawing them closer, guiding them towards the source of the chaos. As they neared the great hall, they encountered a scene of utter pandemonium. Knights were fighting knights, loyalty shattered, alliances broken. The Serpent's Fong, it seemed, had launched a surprise attack, infiltrating the castle, turning Rhys's own men against him. Juliana recognized some of the attackers, men she had suspected, men she had identified as potential members of the secret society. But there were others, faces she did not recognize, men who wore the serpent emblem openly, proudly, their faces contorted with rage and hatred. In the center of the hall, surrounded by a ring of enemies, stood Alaric, Juliana's uncle, his sword dripping with blood, his eyes blazing with a triumphant madness. "The time has come," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. The time for vengeance. The time for Thornwick to be free. Rhys, his face a mask of fury, pushed his way through the fighting, his sword cutting a path towards Alaric. Juliana followed close behind, her heart pounding, her mind racing. "Alaric!" Rhys shouted, his voice filled with righteous anger. "You traitor! You will pay for this!" Alaric laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that sent a shiver of dread down Juliana's spine.
"Pay?" he said.
"I have already paid. The price of loyalty. The price of blood. And now you will pay the price of your arrogance." He lunged at Rhys, his sword flashing in the firelight, the two men engaging in a fierce, desperate duel. The clash of steel echoed through the hall, the shouts of the combatants, the screams of the wounded, creating a cacophony of violence and chaos. Juliana, watching the fight, felt a surge of conflicting emotions. She hated Alaric, despised his treachery, his cruelty, his ambition. But he was also her uncle, her father's brother, a member of her family. She wanted Rhys to win, to defeat Alaric, to end the rebellion, to secure peace. But she also dreaded the thought of her uncle's death, of another act of violence, of another layer of grief added to the already heavy burden she carried. The fight raged back and forth, across the hall, the two men evenly matched, their skills honed by years of training, of battle. But Alaric, fueled by a desperate rage, by a lifetime of resentment and ambition, fought with a ferocity that surprised even Rhys. He managed to disarm Rhys, his sword sending Rhys's weapon clattering across the floor. Rhys, momentarily defenseless, stumbled back, his eyes widening in alarm. Alaric, seeing his opportunity, raised his sword for the killing blow. Juliana, her heart stopping in her chest, cried out, "No." But this time, she did not intervene. She could not. She could not bring herself to save her uncle, not at the cost of Rhys's life. Just as Alaric was about to strike, a figure emerged from the shadows, a figure Juliana recognized instantly: Alara. The young servant girl, her face pale but determined, threw herself at Alaric, her small body colliding with his, disrupting his balance, throwing off his aim. Alaric, surprised by the unexpected attack, stumbled back, his sword missing its mark. Rhys, seizing the opportunity, grabbed a discarded dagger from the floor and lunged at Alaric, plunging the blade into his chest. Alaric gasped, his eyes widening in shock and pain. He looked down at the dagger protruding from his chest, at the blood staining his tunic, his face contorted with disbelief. He looked at Juliana, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and regret. "You," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You betrayed me." Then, his body went limp, his eyes glazed over, and he collapsed to the floor, dead. The great hall fell silent, the fighting ceasing abruptly, the combatants staring in stunned silence at the fallen figure of Alaric. Rhys, his chest heaving, his face covered in sweat and blood, looked at Alara, his eyes filled with gratitude and awe. "You," he said, his voice hoarse and unsteady.
"You saved me."
Again, Alara, her body trembling, her eyes filled with tears, nodded slowly. He would have killed you," she whispered. Rhys turned to Juliana, his gaze searching hers. He saw the tears streaming down her face, the mixture of grief and relief in her eyes. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "It is over," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with a profound weariness. "It is finally over." The shadows in the great hall seemed to deepen, the flickering firelight casting an eerie glow on the scene of carnage, of victory, of loss. Chapter 19. The Dawn of Reckoning. With Alaric dead and the Serpent's Fang's leadership shattered, the rebellion crumbled. The remaining conspirators, demoralized and leaderless, surrendered or fled, their dreams of overthrowing Rhys and reclaiming Thornwick reduced to ashes. The castle, scarred by battle and stained with blood, slowly began to heal. The dead were buried, the wounded tended, and the long, arduous process of rebuilding began. Rhys, his authority restored, his position secure, turn his attention to the task of restoring order, of establishing justice, of forging a lasting peace. He ordered a thorough investigation of the Serpent's Fang, uncovering their network of informants, their hidden assets, their remaining members. He brought the guilty to justice, meting out punishments that were both swift and fair, tempered by mercy and a desire for reconciliation. He also reached out to those who had supported the rebellion, not out of loyalty to Alaric or the Serpent's Fang, but out of a genuine desire for change, for a better future for Thornwick. He listened to their grievances, addressed their concerns, and promised them a voice in the governance of the kingdom. Juliana, her role in the defeat of the rebellion widely acknowledged, became a symbol of hope, of unity, of reconciliation. She had stood by Rhys, risked her life for him, and helped to save the kingdom from destruction. She was hailed as a heroine, a leader, a woman of courage and conviction. But the victory had come at a cost. The war had left deep scars, both physical and emotional. Juliana had lost her uncle, seen her homeland ravaged by conflict, witnessed the horrors of battle firsthand. She had also faced her own inner demons, her own conflicting loyalties, her own forbidden love. She and Rhys, their bond forged in the crucible of war, found solace in each other's arms, their love a beacon of hope in the darkness, a promise of a better future. They spent hours together, talking, planning, dreaming of a Thornwick that was peaceful, prosperous, and just. One evening, as they stood together on the castle ramparts, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, casting a golden glow on the land, Rhys turned to Juliana, his green eyes filled with a mixture of love and longing. "The war is over," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with emotion. "The kingdom is secure. And my promise still stands." Juliana knew what he was referring to his vow to grant her freedom, to allow her to leave Thornwick, to return to what remained of her life. It was a promise she had clung to, a lifeline in the turbulent sea of her captivity. But now, as she looked at Rhys, at his face etched with love and devotion, at the kingdom he had fought so hard to save, at the future they had dreamed of together, she realized that freedom, true freedom, lay not in leaving, but in staying. I do not want to leave," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I want to stay. With you. Here. In Thornwick." Rhys's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, of joy, crossing his features. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice filled with a hopeful uncertainty. Juliana nodded, her heart filled with a love that was both fierce and unwavering. "I am sure," she said. "This is my home. Now. And you are my family." Rhys pulled her close, embracing her tightly, his body trembling with the force of his emotions. He kissed her, a kiss that was both passionate and tender, a kiss that sealed their love, their commitment, their shared destiny. "Then stay with me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Stay with me, Juliana, and be my queen." The words, spoken with such sincerity, such love, such a profound sense of hope, resonated deep within Juliana's soul. She had found her place, her purpose, her love, in the most unexpected of places, in the heart of her former enemy, in the land she had once considered lost. "I will," she whispered back, her voice filled with a joy that transcended all the pain, all the loss, all the challenges they had faced. "I will stay, and I will be your queen." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking display of nature's beauty, a promise of a new dawn, a new beginning, a new chapter in the history of Thornwick, of Lyonesse, of two hearts intertwined forever. A soft breeze began to blow, a promise of calm. Chapter 20. The Lioness's Choice. The decision made, the future set, Juliana and Rhys began the preparations for their marriage, a union that would not only symbolize their personal love, but also the unification of Thornwick and Lyonesse, the forging of a new era of peace and prosperity. The news of the impending nuptials spread throughout the kingdom, greeted with a mixture of joy, relief, and cautious optimism. The people of Thornwick, weary of war and bloodshed, saw in the marriage a promise of stability, of a future free from conflict and strife. The people of Lyonesse, long accustomed to Rhys's strong leadership, welcomed Juliana as a symbol of reconciliation, of a partnership that would strengthen their kingdom and secure its borders. The wedding itself was a grand affair, a spectacle of medieval pageantry and splendor. The great hall of the castle was transformed into a breathtaking scene of beauty and opulence. Tapestries depicting scenes of courtly love and heroic deeds adorned the walls. Flowers in vibrant hues filled the air with their sweet fragrance, and candles by the hundreds cast a warm, golden glow on the assembled guests. Knights in shining armor, ladies in flowing gowns, nobles from across the land, and representatives from neighboring kingdoms gathered to witness the union of the Lion of Lyonesse and the Lioness of Thornwick, a title Juliana had earned through her courage, her loyalty, and her unwavering commitment to her people. Juliana, radiant in a gown of ivory silk embroidered with gold and silver thread, her dark hair adorned with a circlet of flowers and pearls, walked down the aisle on the arm of Sir Gareth, the young knight who had risked his life to expose Caelin's treachery. He had been chosen for this honor as a symbol of redemption, of the healing that was taking place within the kingdom. Rhys, standing at the altar in a tunic of deep green velvet, his golden hair gleaming in the candlelight, watched her approach, his green eyes filled with a love that was both profound and unwavering. He saw in her not just a beautiful woman, but a strong, intelligent, compassionate leader, a partner who would share his burdens, his triumphs, his dreams. The ceremony was performed by the Archbishop, a solemn and sacred ritual that bound Juliana and Rhys together in a bond of marriage, of love, of mutual respect and commitment. They exchanged vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, until death did them part. As they exchanged rings, symbols of their eternal love, the hush fell over the great hall, a sense of awe and reverence filling the air. The assembled guests, witnessing the union of two such powerful, such compelling figures, felt a surge of hope, a belief that a new era had truly begun, an era of peace, of prosperity, of unity. After the ceremony, a lavish feast was held, a celebration of the marriage, of the new alliance, of the future that lay ahead. Music filled the air, laughter echoed through the hall, and the guests feasted on roasted meats, fine wines, and delicacies from across the land. Juliana and Rhys, seated at the high table, presided over the festivities, their faces radiant with happiness, their eyes sparkling with love. They received congratulations from the assembled guests, accepted gifts, and exchanged words of gratitude and appreciation. But even in the midst of the celebration, Juliana could not forget the past, the sacrifices that had been made, the lives that had been lost. She thought of her father, of her uncle, of all those who had perished in the war. She knew that their memory would forever be etched in her heart, a reminder of the fragility of peace, of the constant need for vigilance, for justice, for compassion. As the evening drew to a close, Juliana and Rhys retired to their chambers, their hearts filled with a love that was both profound and enduring. They had faced adversity, overcome challenges, and emerged stronger, more united, more committed to each other and to their kingdom. They stood together at the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape, at the castle walls that had once been a symbol of captivity, but now represented a sanctuary, a home, a future filled with hope and promise. "We did it," Rhys said, his voice soft, yet filled with emotion. "We built a new beginning. Together." Juliana nodded, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude.
"Yes," she said. "We did.
"And we will continue to build. Together. Always." She leaned into him, her body resting against his, their hearts beating as one. The lioness had made her choice, and it was a choice that would forever shape the destiny of Thornwick, of Lyonesse, of two kingdoms united by love, by courage, by a shared vision of a better future. The moonlight bathed them in its gentle glow, a silent blessing on their union, their future, their love. All seemed possible. All was well. Epilogue. Years passed, and the reign of Rhys and Juliana became known as a golden age for Thornwick and Lyonesse. The two kingdoms, once rivals, now stood united, their combined strength and resources creating a realm of unprecedented prosperity and stability. Juliana, true to her word, proved to be a wise and compassionate queen, beloved by her people, respected by her peers, and a true partner to Rhys in all matters of governance. She championed the cause of the common folk, established schools and hospitals, and promoted trade and commerce, ensuring that the benefits of peace reached all corners of the kingdom. Rhys, guided by Juliana's wisdom and tempered by her compassion, ruled with justice and fairness, upholding the law, protecting the weak, and ensuring the security of his realm. He never forgot the lessons of the war, the cost of conflict, the importance of unity and understanding. Together, they fostered a culture of tolerance and respect, encouraging dialogue between different factions, promoting reconciliation, and healing the wounds of the past. The memory of the serpent's fang, of Alaric's treachery, served as a constant reminder of the dangers of division, of the importance of vigilance, of the need to constantly strive for peace. Alara, who had played such a crucial role in saving Rhys's life, was rewarded for her bravery and loyalty. She was given a position of honor in the royal household, becoming a close confidant and advisor to Juliana, her wisdom and insight proving invaluable in matters of court and diplomacy. She eventually married Sir Gareth, the knight who had also risked his life to expose the assassination plot, their union a symbol of the new era of trust and cooperation that had dawned upon the kingdom. Children were born to Rhys and Juliana, heirs to the combined thrones of Thornwick and Lyonesse, ensuring the continuation of their legacy, the perpetuation of their vision of a united and prosperous realm. They raised their children with love and compassion, instilling in them the values of justice, fairness, and a deep respect for their people. As the years turned into decades, Juliana and Rhys, their hair touched with silver, their faces lined with the wisdom of age, continued to rule together, their love for each other, their commitment to their kingdom, undiminished by time. They had weathered storms, faced challenges, and emerged stronger, more united, their bond unbreakable. One evening, as they sat together on the castle ramparts, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, casting a golden glow on the land, just as they had done on the eve of their marriage, Rhys turned to Juliana, his green eyes, though dimmed by age, still filled with the same love and devotion he had felt for her all those years ago. "We built a good life," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with emotion. "A good kingdom. Together." Juliana nodded, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "Yes," she said, "we did. And I would not trade it for anything." She leaned into him, her body resting against his, their hearts beating as one, just as they had done for so many years. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking display of nature's beauty, a final, silent blessing on their long and fruitful lives, their enduring love, their legacy of peace and unity. The land, stretching out before them, was at peace. Their work was done. The end.